Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. To the elite, thank you so much for your dedication, loyalty, and love. The feelings are always reciprocated. If you are new to the channel, please note that I am an actual human. I actually narrate, edit, and upload all of my work to YouTube. So, if you enjoy supporting a non-AI channel, please hit that like button, comment, and share with friends and family. Or if you would like to become part of the Back to Ashes gang, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and make sure your bell is set to all. That way you know every time I upload a video. With that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled The Unsolved. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. Somewhere in between the first case, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. And before we get started, I would like to say my heart goes out to all the friends, family, and anyone else that are still feeling the loss of their loved ones. Nylene Marshall. Child vanishes in Helena National Forest. Extensive search efforts turn up no sign of the missing child. A Montana mystery. On the afternoon of June 25, 1983, 4-year-old Nylene Marshall was playing with other children on the brinks of a shallow creek in Helena National Forest. Her friends would recall turning around at one point and realizing that she was no longer there. The search for Nylene, the largest in the history of Helena National Forest, was untimely, unsuccessful, and no substantial clues were found. Shortly before she vanished, multiple children had witnessed Nylene speaking to an unidentified man wearing a purple jogging suit. Whether or not he played a role in her disappearance is still unknown. But 2 years after the young girl went missing, authorities, as well as Nylene's loved ones, began receiving unsettling calls and letters from an anonymous man who claimed to have abducted her. So, what really happened to Nylene Marshall? Nylene K. Marshall. One of 3 children, Nylene K. Marshall was born on September 18, 1978, in Orange, California, to parents William and Nancy Briscoe. Her parents divorced when she was just a baby, and Nancy went on to marry a man named Kim Marshall, who adopted Nylene. Little is said about William, and it's unclear if he had an active role in her life. The Marshalls eventually moved to Alhambra, Montana. They loved the outdoors and frequently went on hikes, instilling an appreciation for the natural world in their children. Growing up in this environment sparked Nylene's curiosity, as well as her love for animals and nature in general. She loved it here, Nancy would later remember. She would stand by the breakfast table beside an open window and say, "Smell that fresh air." She loved the outdoors and nature. Family picnic and a mystery man. On June 25, 1983, the Marshall family was in Helena National Forest for a picnic. Kim and Nancy were also in the area for a ham radio operators event. By all accounts, the day was an enjoyable one to begin with. Nylene had spent much of it looking for frogs with the other children. That afternoon, she and 2 other children were playing on the shallow banks of Maupin Creek, said to be less than 100 yards away from the picnic area. At approximately 4 p.m., they noticed that Nylene was gone. They looked for her but couldn't locate the 4-year-old anywhere, so they got the adults involved. The area in which she vanished was said to be one of rough terrain and dense vegetation. No one thought that barefoot child could have gotten very far on her own. Furthermore, Nancy said that it would be highly uncharacteristic of her to wander away. Nylene was trained about the woods and safety. I know she didn't wander off. Still, there was no sign of her anywhere, nor did she answer their calls. The concerned parents reported her missing to authorities that day. Multiple children reported having witnessed Nylene speaking to a dark-haired man wearing a purple jogging suit. The full content of the conversation is unknown, but they picked up on snippets of it, hearing Nylene say things like, "My brother can run faster than you." They also heard the stranger ask the young girl if she liked to play games. Nothing more is known about this individual. It was only determined that he wasn't part of the family picnic or ham radio operator's event. Given his attire, it was assumed that he'd probably come to the national forest to run or hike. And while no one had actually seen Nylene walk away with him, some wondered if he might know where she was or have any relevant information. However, he proved to be as elusive as Nylene did, to this day, has never been identified. Additionally, no one ever came forward claiming to be this man. Search efforts and a scent trail that raised more questions. Local law enforcement understood how important it was to locate the child as quickly as possible, fearing that she might be hurt or lost in the wilderness, and formed large search parties for this purpose. FBI agents, the Lewis and Clark Search and Rescue Team, National Guardsmen, Air Force helicopters, search dogs, and hundreds of volunteers aided in the efforts to find Nylene Marshall. A highly skilled search dog, Duke, was brought in as well. He had proven to be helpful in numerous other cases, having located 37 missing persons by that point. He picked up Nylene's scent, which he tracked for over a mile before losing her trail abruptly near a service road. This raised some unsettling questions about what might have happened to the little girl. Had she been picked up by someone, or had Duke simply lost her trail for another reason? The searchers combed larger portions of Helena National Forest, including creeks, ridges, beaver dams, undercuts, and abandoned mine shafts, but turned up no clues. It was the largest missing person search in Helena National Forest's history, but was ultimately fruitless. Jefferson County Sheriff Tom Dawson explained why it was called off after 10 days. "We have continued to search as long as there has been a reasonable chance that Nylene could be found alive." Nylene's family was devastated, but also deeply appreciative for the outpouring of support. "When your child is missing, it gives you drive," said Nancy. "When you see people take off from their jobs and come from out of town and search day after day, all for love of a 4-year-old little girl, it gives you motivation." Nancy and Kim decided to form their own search dog nonprofit organization, hoping to one day help others locate their missing loved ones. With the goal in mind, they adopted a German Shepherd puppy named Jeff. Kim Marshall was looked at as a person of interest early on, but had a verifiable ally and was not with the child when she vanished. Calls and letters. The Marshalls never gave up looking for Nylene and continued to distribute flyers to raise awareness of her case. However, months and then years would pass with no significant development. This is until November of 1985, when authorities and her loved ones began to receive disconcerting calls, and eventually letters, from a man who claimed to know exactly where she was. According to him, he'd come across her on the day that she went missing and had decided to take her away with him to raise as his own. He explained that Kay, as he referred to her, was homeschooled by him and traveled extensively with him. Disturbingly, it was said that he alluded to sexually abusing the child during these calls. It was also noted that he appeared to have a connection to Wisconsin. He not only contacted authorities in Wisconsin with his abduction story, but one of his calls was also traced to a phone booth in Edgerton, Wisconsin. Furthermore, the letters were postmarked from Madison. Although he did reach out to Child Find of America, which was based in New York, as well as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The full contents of his letters have never been released to the public, but several excerpts have been. Quote, I didn't want their person to try to get information from her. All I could tell them was that she was okay. I hope Child Find can get the following back to her family. I picked Kay up on the road in the Elkhorn Park area behind Helena and Boulder. She was crying and frightened, and I held her, so she was shaking, and I decided that I would keep her and love her. I took her home with me. I have a nice investment income, and I can work at home, so I care for her myself all the time. I teach her at home, and she likes to go with me when I travel. Her hair is short and curly now, and she has really grown. She is about 45 inches and around 50 pounds. She has all 4 of her permanent upper and 2 of her lower incisors at this time. She takes a bath, brushes her teeth every day. She eats well. Her favorite meal is pizza and cherry. She would gladly recount to you trips to San Francisco, New York, Oklahoma City, New Orleans, Nashville, Chicago, Puerto Rico, and Canada. We were even in Britain for a month last year, and she loved it. Nobody questions passports. And by far, this is the most disturbing of the excerpts. It is, or where it comes from, only that I get it from the bathroom every morning. It is actually a spoonful of my semen. It doesn't affect her physically. I have never molested her in any way. She is a sweet little girl, and it has become of how much I have grown to love her that I realize how much her family must miss her. But she has adjusted and seems happy. She trusts me and isn't afraid. We play a lot and she laughs when we clown around. She smiles and acts coy when I tease her. She giggles when we snuggle and hug me sometimes for no apparent reason. I love her and I have her, and I just can't let her go. While it might be easy to dismiss this individual as someone who was merely investing a story to gain attention or due to a sick desire to taunt others, something that happens a lot in cases, law enforcement said there was reason to believe he might just be telling the truth. Quote, he was privy to things a normal person would not have access to, noted one detective. They said he had information relating to her disappearance that had never been disclosed to the public, leading credence to his claims. But if he was telling the truth, why come forward to taunt her family and authorities after 2 years? The letters and calls ended as suddenly as they'd begun. Investigators were unable to track down this man or learn of his identity. However, it is worth noting that an eyewitness claimed to have spotted Nylene in Jacksonville, Wisconsin, although this sighting was never substantiated. Murder confessions. Another man, whose name has not been revealed, reportedly confessed to having murdered Nylene and disposing of her body in a mine shaft in Helena. The mine shaft in question, which had already been sealed off by this point, was reopened and searched, but no trace of the missing girl was found. In a separate incident, a convicted sex offender named Richard James Wilson turned himself in 1991. The 42-year-old stated that he'd killed both Nylene and another person. However, he was unable to lead detectives to where he'd supposedly buried the child. Additionally, there was no evidence against him beyond his own word. So they released him. He later recanted his confession. Renewed public interest leads to discovery of another missing child. In 1990, Unsolved Mysteries featured her case, which resulted in new tips pouring in. The most notable of these came from a school official who believed that Nylene was a student at a school in Washington. They noted that the behavior of the young girl's father was suspicious, leading them to feel like something was off. Investigators pursued this lead, and while the student in question was actually not Nylene, amazingly enough, it turned out to be another missing girl, Monica Bonilla, who had vanished in California in 1982, had been abducted by her father and forced to live under an assumed name, Mary Ann Kelly. He'd also told her that her mother was dead, which was untrue. Fortunately, the 13-year-old was found safe and reunited with her mother, Rosemary. However, the mystery of what happened to Nylene Marshall was sadly no closer to be solved. Strange sighting in New Orleans. In 1997, a nurse claimed to have seen Nylene and her abductor at the New Orleans hospital in which she worked. According to her, a 19-year-old woman, Helena, explained that she was pregnant and asked to be admitted. She mentioned that she'd grown up in another country and believed her mother's name was Nylene. The man gave no name, and there is no available description of him. When the hospital staff attempted to ask the pair more questions, they appeared to become nervous and left without answering. The veracity of this story has never been confirmed. Other development. Nylene's family would soon suffer another blow. Tragically, Nancy Marshall was raped and murdered in a hotel room in Mexico in 1995. There are very few details about her case, which remains unsolved. Authorities announced in 2017 that they still have no major leads or evidence relating to Nylene's disappearance. Her case is still open and unsolved. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Nylene Marshall, you are encouraged to contact the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office at 406-225-4075. Garrett Bardsley, Utah Boy Scout, vanishes without a trace. 12-year-old Garrett disappeared during a camping trip. Young boy disappeared. Garrett Bardsley, a 12-year-old Boy Scout, went camping with his father, brothers, and other Boy Scouts in Utah's Uinta Mountains in late August 2004. It was meant to be a fun trip before the start of a new school year. But what had begun as an enjoyable outing in the wilderness would unexpectedly turn to tragedy. Garrett got up early on the morning of August 20th to go fishing with his father at one of the nearby lakes, but the boy would soon mysteriously vanish on his way back to the camp. And though the search for him was initiated within just 15 to 20 minutes of when he was last seen, neither Garrett nor the fishing pole he'd been carrying would ever be located. What happened to Garrett Bardsley? Garrett Alexander Bardsley. The youngest of 4 children, Garrett Alexander Bardsley was born on July 24th of 1992. to parents Heidi and Kevin. The family was Mormon and active in the LDS church. Sweet and happy, 12-year-old Garrett loved school and being a member of the Boy Scouts. Though he struggled with reading, he had a determined spirit and was intent on improving. Garrett was always the kid who had the most fun, remembered his father, Kevin. He was the one that made us laugh. Garrett enjoyed the outdoors and camping, and had earned a merit badge for wilderness survival skills. But his time spent out in nature wasn't always carefree. In fact, he had a disturbing encounter once while in the woods. Garrett ran face to face into a bear and it scared him to death, recalled Scoutmaster Wally Trotter. Fortunately, though, Garrett walked away from the incident unharmed. Early morning fishing. On August 19, 2004, Garrett and a group, which included his father Kevin, his two brothers, 18 Boy Scouts, ranging in age from 12 to 18, and 8 other fathers, reached the Cuddleed Lake area of the Uinta Mountains for an end-of-summer camping trip. Wally Trotter, the scoutmaster, was unable to accompany them as he couldn't get the time off work. The Cuddleed Lake Trail is approximately 6.6 miles long and reaches an elevation of 1,000 feet. Aside from Cuddleed Lake itself, there are several smaller lakes in the region, none of which have ever been officially named and have been assigned numbers instead. The hike was uneventful, and the group set up camp around a third of a mile away from Cuddleed Lake. The following morning, Kevin woke up to his youngest son and told him to get ready to go fishing. Kevin and Garrett walked to one of the unnamed lakes with their fishing poles. It's unclear how far away from camp they were, as sources vary, citing anything from 150 to 300 yards. However, the map that law enforcement would use in their search from Garrett indicated that the father and son had been at the northern shore of the lake, placing them more than 300 yards away from their camp. The lake is situated in a basin with a mixture of open and wooded areas around it. The basin itself is surrounded by steep terrain. Garrett suddenly fell into the water. It's not clear where exactly, but either in a boggy area beside the lake or in a stream next to the trail. And his pants and shoes were soaked. Because of this, he became cold and wanted to change into dry clothes and shoes. Kevin thought this was a good idea and suggested that his son head back to camp, since that's where his extra clothing was. He asked Garrett if he knew his way back, and Garrett assured him that he did, which had made sense as the camp is said to have been a fairly straight shot away from where they had set up for fishing. However, as Garrett started to leave, Kevin noticed that he went in the wrong direction and corrected him. Now heading the right way, the 12-year-old soon disappeared from view at around 8 a.m. After 15 minutes had passed with no sign of Garrett, Kevin wondered where he was and returned to camp, only to find out that Garrett had never arrived. They began to search for the missing Boy Scout immediately, calling out to him as they did, but neither heard nor saw him anywhere. "We thought he'd yell or hear us and come toward the sound," said Alex, one of the missing boy's friends. But he never did. Where is Garrett? Kevin and the others knew how crucial it was to locate Garrett before nightfall, as the temperatures would plummet then. But no trace of the 12-year-old, not even his fishing rod, turned up. In the coming days, the Bardsley family, with the help of search and rescue team members and over 1,000 volunteers, tirelessly looked for Garrett. Searchers, on foot and horseback, utilizing helicopters and bloodhounds, discovered Nothing. Divers were brought in as well, but turned up no clues in the lake. "We don't want to leave Garrett on this mountain," Kevin said. "We want to bring him home." The only clue yielded by these extensive efforts was a single sock, but DNA testing would ultimately prove that it did not belong to Garrett. At one point during the search, Kevin was overcome by a strange feeling. "I remember one of the first particular times I knelt down by myself and tried to bargain with the Lord that I'd do anything to have him back. I got an overwhelming impression that I didn't have to worry about Garrett, that his test was done." Sadly, after several days had gone by, the search for Garrett became a recovery mission, as they knew that he likely couldn't have survived this long in the wilderness, especially with the low temperatures at night. Still, no trace of him was found. "It's hard to remember those 2 weeks," said Garrett's sister, Courtney, "because you're just kind of in a blur and your body's kind of numb. I thought we were going to find him." The loss was devastating for the entire family, but perhaps had the strongest impact on Garrett's brother, Cameron, as the two had been very close. The Garrett Bardsley Foundation. "We have 2 lives," stated Kevin. "We have a life before Garrett, when Garrett was here, and we have a life after Garrett." The family attempted to channel their grief into something positive and formed the Garrett Bardsley Foundation, whose mission is to help locate missing persons, as well as to build schools in poor nations. Kevin would go on to join the search for another Boy Scout who had gone missing in the Uinta Mountains, 11-year-old Brennan Hawkins, who would ultimately be found safe. YouTuber The Missing Enigma visited the area in which Garrett Bardsley vanished and shared the experience with viewers. He noticed that the trail leading to the lake is narrow and poorly defined in some spots, making it easy to get off track. What he found to be less clear, however, was how Garrett would have managed to leave the basin region, if he did, as the area within the basin was thoroughly searched and the land surrounding it is rather steep and difficult to navigate. Perhaps Garrett sought shelter somewhere that is hidden from view, and this explains why he was never discovered. As other cases have shown, it is unfortunately easy to not only get lost in the wilderness, but also to never be located. The authorities do not believe that foul play was involved, though, interestingly, investigators reportedly spoke to an inmate in connection with Garrett's case. Neither the name of this individual nor the content of the interview have ever been released to the public. The most common theories are that he either succumbed to the elements or might have been attacked by a wild animal, although no blood or signs of a struggle were ever discovered. The show America's Most Wanted received a tip in 2009 from a woman who claimed to have spotted Garrett with 2 identified men in a grocery store. This sighting has never been substantiated. In 2006, a hunter discovered a shoe while hunting near Kubrant Lake. It looked to have been there for some time and was similar in appearance to the shoes that Garrett was known to have been wearing at the time of his disappearance. Yet, upon another examination, it became clear that the sneaker could not belong to him, as it was too large. To this day, Garrett Bardsley has never been found, and his disappearance remains a mystery. Of the unnamed lake near which he was last seen, Wally Trotter had this to say: "We don't care what the rest of everybody calls it. In our mind, that is Garrett's Lake, and that will always be Garrett's Lake." Heidi Bardsley took comfort in the memory of the last interaction she had with her son, which she poignantly described. "I knew he knew that I loved him. The last time I saw him, he gave me a big hug. That's what keeps me going through this. I can still feel him squeeze me." The strange disappearance of Brian Schaefer. A man goes missing during a night out. Medical student mysteriously vanishes. In the early morning hours of April 1st, 2006, 27-year-old Brian Schaefer was out celebrating the beginning of spring break with two of his friends. Around 2 a.m., the medical student was seen on camera outside of the Ugly Tuna Saloona in Columbus. He was last spotted walking towards the entrance of the bar, which was located just off camera. After this, his movements are unknown. He was never seen leaving the bar, at least not on the security cam footage, although it's believed that he likely exited through another door. What is certain is that Brian vanished without a trace. The investigation into his disappearance struggled to find evidence, anything that would make one theory stand out amongst the rest. Mysterious phone pings, an uncertain scent trail, and a lack of cooperation from one of his friends would only create further confusion. Nearly 2 decades later, the question remains: what really happened to Brian Schaefer? Brian Randall Schaefer. The oldest of 2 sons, Brian Randall Schaefer was born on February 25, 1979, in Pickerington, Ohio, to parents Randall and Renee Schaefer. Brian went on to attend the Ohio State University, where he obtained a bachelor's degree in microbiology in 2003, as well as a minor in molecular genetics. Those who knew him described Brian as a free-spirited, intelligent, outgoing, and a jokester. He was especially close to his mother, Renee, a nurse who served as an inspiration to pursue a career in the medical field. Brian took some time off after graduation to work as a radiology tech assistant at Ohio State University Hospital. However, it wasn't long before he decided to get back on track with his schooling. In August of 2004, he began attending the OSU College of Medicine, with a view towards eventually becoming a doctor. He met and began dating a fellow medical student, Alexis Wagner. Though they'd only been seeing each other for a matter of months, their friends and respective families believed that the relationship was becoming serious and anticipated that they would soon become engaged. No one was more hopeful for this outcome than Renee, who loved Alexis and encouraged her son to propose. A heartbroken family. In 2005, the Schaefer family was dealt a difficult blow when Renee was diagnosed with myelodysplastic syndrome, or MDS, a rare type of blood cancer that interferes with the body's ability to form healthy blood cells. It's also commonly referred to as bone marrow failure disorder. Renee's diagnosis hit everyone in the family hard, but no one more so than Brian, who loved his mother dearly and described her as the greatest and most wonderful person in the world. Her final gift to her son would be a trip for 2 to Miami for the upcoming spring break. He planned to go with Alexis. Sadly, on March 6, 2006, Renee Schaefer passed away at the age of 51, leaving behind a devastated family. Disappearance. In the days and weeks following his mother's passing, Brian struggled to come to terms with the loss. One day he asked Alexis to run away with him, although it was unclear if he was joking or not. The matter was soon dropped, but a week later, He told Alexis that he should move on and find someone else because he was in a dark place emotionally. She refused to leave him, however, and the relationship continued. They still planned to go to Miami together in early April. Brian appeared to be feeling at least somewhat better by late March. He was relieved when finals were over and spring break begun. He went out for dinner with his father, Randy, on the evening of March 31st to celebrate. According to Randy, Brian seemed exhausted, probably from pulling multiple all-nighters, studying in preparation for his exams. But nothing else seemed out of the ordinary. Allegedly, however, there was tension between Randy and his sons over the share of Renee's life insurance policy that Brian and Derek were set to receive. Side note, Renee reportedly changed her life insurance policy without his knowledge and made their sons beneficiaries in addition to him, something he learned after she passed away. After dinner, Brian went out with his friend, William Clint Lawrence. The two stopped at a bar early in the evening, and while there, Clint phoned his friend Meredith Reed, asking her to join them. She picked them up, and the three eventually ended up at the Ugly Tuna Saloon in Columbus. He called Alexis, who was in Toledo visiting her family, at around 10 p.m. to let her know that he loved her and to confirm their travel plans for Monday. Brian and Clint reportedly had an argument that night, the cause of which is unknown, but it ended with Brian walking away. Around 2 a.m. on April 1st, Clint and Meredith realized that they hadn't seen Brian in a while and started to search for him. They looked all over the two-story bar, including inside the restrooms, but couldn't find him anywhere. They were also unable to reach him by phone. Assuming that he had simply chosen to walk home, his apartment was only 6 blocks away. They ultimately left without him. The following morning, Meredith took Clint to pick up his car from the parking lot of Brian's apartment building, but neither checked on Brian while they were there, even though they still hadn't heard from him. Neither Randy nor Alexis could reach him that weekend either. When he didn't show up at the airport on Monday, April 3rd, they knew something was wrong and reported him missing. The investigation. In an effort to locate Brian, or any evidence as to what happened to him, law enforcement searched the Ugly Tuna Saloon, as well as hospitals, homeless shelters, dumpsters, and trash cans in the area. Nothing was found. Strangely, just after Brian vanished, his apartment was broken into. However, the only items that appeared to be missing were DVDs, a television, and some clothing. Since Columbus has more security cameras than any other city in Ohio, more than Cleveland, Toledo, and Cincinnati combined, in fact, the police hoped that video footage might shed light on the events that led to his disappearance. The last known footage of Brian showed him outside the Ugly Tuna Saloon just before 2 a.m. on the morning of April 1st, talking to two women. As stated earlier, he was last seen walking back in the direction of the entrance, which was located just off camera. Theories. Though it has sometimes been erroneously reported that the Ugly Tuna Saloon had only one exit, there were actually others. One of these, the emergency exit, was also monitored by a security camera. Many hours were put into reviewing all the video footage, but Brian seemingly doesn't make an appearance after 2 a.m. However, there was a back door that wasn't under video surveillance. Many have theorized that Brian could have used this exit. This is certainly plausible, as those familiar with the bar noted that, while they weren't supposed to use that back exit, people often did anyway. Jump cut in the footage. According to Sergeant John Hurst, there was a point in the footage in which there appeared to be a jump cut, suggesting that the camera had been overridden by someone, possibly by a security guard. However, Sergeant Hurst also said that there was an employee stationed at the emergency exit that night. During an interview, this individual said that no one attempted to use that particular exit on the night in question. Another interesting piece of information was that one of the doors led onto a construction site. It has been suggested that Brian could have wandered in there while intoxicated and gotten hurt. This doesn't appear to be the case, though, since the area was thoroughly searched afterwards, with cadaver dogs in tow and no sign of the missing man was found. Additionally, it has been speculated that after leaving the bar, however and whenever that happened, Brian could have either taken his own life or been abducted, possibly robbed, and then murdered. It should also be noted that the Ugly Tuna Saloon was located in a high-crime area. The business has since closed. Interestingly, Hurst also stated that Brian's scent was tracked to a nearby Wendy's parking lot. However, he wasn't 100% certain that it really was his scent, so whether or not Brian was there that night remains open for speculation. A new life. Another theory poised was that he chose to leave and start a new life elsewhere. However, no evidence was ever found to support this idea, although he did ask Alexis to run away with him just weeks before he went missing. Furthermore, some have suggested that becoming a doctor wasn't truly what he wanted, and was rather something he'd been pursuing to make his mother proud, leading investigators to wonder if he was unhappy with his path in life. For her part, Alexis didn't believe that he'd choose to leave that way. I don't think he's alive. I can't imagine he would have just done that. There was no further activity on either of his credit cards or his bank account following his disappearance. Yet authorities didn't discount the idea that he might have willingly walked away, and even sounded as if they might favor this theory. Here's a statement from Hurst. There is nothing we have been able to recover that shows he succumbed to foul play. So again, the probability of that isn't as great as he just walked away. All told, detectives interviewed over 100 people, including the 2 women he was last seen speaking with that evening, but learned nothing that could help push the investigation forward. Clint. Brian's loved ones have questioned if Clint knows more than he is saying. While cooperative with law enforcement early in the investigation, Clint soon chose to stop speaking to the police after consulting with his lawyer. He also refused to testify before a grand jury. Whether this is indicative of guilt or rather just prudence and a fear of being falsely accused of a crime is open for debate. He also refused to take a polygraph test, though it's difficult to determine how much significance to attach to this decision, given the fact that polygraphs are notoriously unreliable. To this day, no evidence implicating Clint in Brian's disappearance has been discovered. Derek Schaefer, Brian's brother, had this to say. As soon as the detectives started getting involved, that's when he pretty much had no contact with anybody. I've always thought he definitely knows something, just won't come forward with it. If Brian did take off somewhere, if that is the case, we just always had a strong feeling that Clint would possibly know that. Cell phone pings and other clues. Alexis continued to call his cell phone every night for months after he went missing. Each time, it would go straight to voicemail. That is, until one night, 3 months after Brian vanished, when the phone actually rang 3 times. There was no answer, but investigators discovered that the phone pinged a cell tower in Hilliard, roughly 14 miles away from where he was last seen. Why did this happen? Did someone discover his phone and turn it on? Or had the phone perhaps been in someone else's possession since the night of Brian's disappearance? These questions, as with so many others in this case, remain unanswered. Sadly, Randy Schaefer, who worked tirelessly to find his son, passed away on September 14, 2008, when a tree fell on him during a windstorm. However, the death inadvertently produced a possible clue in the case. A private investigator by the name of Don Corbett, who was hired by the Schaefer family, found a curious message posted on the online guest book for Randy's funeral. The comment read, "Dad, I love you. Love, Brian. U.S. Virgin Islands." The Columbia Division of Police subpoenaed the web host's records to trace the commenter's geographic origin. They later determined that the post was written on a public computer located in Franklin County, Ohio. The identity of the commenter remains unknown. Corbett had since said that the police wouldn't allow him to access information and evidence related to the case. As a result, he had to file an application for a writ of mandamus to compel case records and evidence from the police chief. Financial records raise questions. Kelly Bruce, host of the podcast Brian Schaefer, Dead or Alive, was able to review Brian's financial records from the months leading up to his disappearance and noted something interesting about them. Quote, "Hey everyone, I know it's been a long time, but I want to give everyone an update on what I have been working on. Get ready for a novel, LOL. A few months ago, I received several months' worth of Brian's bank statements and 3 months of his credit card statements. At first glance, there is nothing suspicious, but I noticed a couple things that made me raise an eyebrow. On the February 2006 Discover card statement, Brian had a balance of $6,746.94. The February statement for his Chase Amazon card had a balance of $7,972.66. The February checking account statement showed Brian with an ending balance of $2,905.52. However, by the March statements, both credit cards were paid off completely with no record of the payment on Brian's bank records, and his balance remained almost the same. So, how did all his debt get paid off 1 month before Brian went missing? While going through his transactions, looking for any sign of how Brian's credit cards were paid off, I noticed something else odd. Brian had some very strange deposits from someone without a job. From November 2005 to March of 2006, Brian deposited one check each month in the amount of $425. That's not too odd. But then I looked at the check numbers. Number 1326, number 1327, number 1328, and number 1329. So, who has a checking account that is only writing checks to Brian once a month? On January 3, 2006, Brian made a deposit into his bank account via an ATM at National City Bank in Pickerton in the amount of $5,275. Again, this wouldn't be strange if Brian had a source of income. So, who was giving Brian money? My first thought was his mom, Renee. However, she was also on Brian's checking account and could have just done a transfer from her personal account to her shared account with Brian. I cannot believe it's been almost 19 years and I am still finding out new things about Brian's life and disappearance. Imagine what we could learn if CPD would be transparent with this obvious cold case. Would love to hear everyone's thoughts. According to Kelly, she was told by those close to Brian that Randy hadn't been paying any of his expenses, so it's unclear who helped him pay off his debt. Additionally, she stated that law enforcement didn't know the answer to this question either, or at least claimed not to when presented with this information. A Tijuana sighting. In 2020, a photo of a homeless man in Tijuana, Mexico, bearing a resemblance to Brian Schaefer went viral on social media. However, facial recognition analysis carried out by the FBI later determined that this man is not Brian. 2023 update. 15 years after his disappearance, the Ohio Attorney General's Bureau of Criminal Investigation and the Columbus Division of Police released an age progression image of Brian Schaefer and requested help from the public. Attorney General Dave Yost stated, quote, "Take a close look at this image. A single tip can reignite a cold case and bring a family closer to reunification with a loved one. Hope doesn't have an expiration date. Every missing person counts." Meanwhile, the lead Columbus investigator who worked on Schaefer's case has since retired. Detective Blanche Tucker took over and started the process of re-interviewing witnesses and people connected to Brian. Tucker said she believes someone involved with the disappearance withheld information during the original investigation, but declined to elaborate on this statement. There have been no further developments. Brian Schaefer's case remains open and unsolved. Crime Stoppers of Central Ohio is offering a $100,000 reward for any information that can help solve this case. You can leave your tip anonymously by calling 614-461-TIPS for tips. The mysterious disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Brandon exclaimed, "Oh shit," during a phone call with his parents and was never heard from again. College student mysteriously vanishes. In the early morning hours of May 14, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson was driving home after partying when he was in a minor accident. He was uninjured, as he'd soon tell his parents on the phone, but needed them to come pick him up since his vehicle was in the ditch. He struggled to give them accurate directions and, as it would later be learned, was actually roughly 25 miles away from where he had believed himself to be. He began walking, heading for what he thought was the city of Lind. Despite having poor vision in one eye, Brandon left his glasses behind. After spending the better part of an hour on the phone with his parents, he suddenly exclaimed, "Oh shit," and then fell silent. He was never seen or heard from again. What happened to Brandon Swanson? Brandon Victor Swanson. The oldest of two children, Brandon Victor Swanson was born on January 30th, 1989, in Marshall, Minnesota, to parents Brian and Annette. Intelligent and funny, Brandon was an avid reader who excelled in school and was close to his family. In 2008, 19-year-old Brandon was a college student enrolled in a wind turbine program at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby. He intended to transfer that fall to Iowa Western Community College in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and major in science. Night of the incident. The spring semester had just come to an end, and on the night of May 13, 2008, Brandon went to two different parties to celebrate. He was seen drinking at both parties, but according to his friends, he didn't drink enough to become overly intoxicated. The route Brandon drove from the gathering in Canby to Marshall was familiar to him. It was the same route along Minnesota State Highway 68 that he had taken every day to attend classes. But, for some reason, he avoided the highway and took the back roads. When he reached the 3900 block of Lynn Lincoln Road, Brandon suddenly swerved off the road and into a ditch. At around 2 a.m. on the morning of May 14th, he called his parents from his cell phone, informing them that he had essentially high-centered the vehicle. He assured them that both he and the car were fine and that he merely needed to be picked up. He told his parents that he believed himself to be near the city of Lind and that the lights he spotted off in the distance were coming from there. So they drove to the area to look for him. Both Brandon and his parents had agreed to flash their headlights on and off in order to signal to each other. However, after several failed attempts at locating Brandon using this method, tensions began to rise. "Don't you see me?" he asked his parents, exasperated. Brian's final call. Finally, Brandon decided on a different course of action. He started walking through a field in the direction of the lights and asked his parents to meet him in the parking lot of a popular nightclub in Lind. Unfortunately, he would never make it there. 47 minutes into the call, Brian suddenly exclaimed, "Oh shit!" Then there was silence. The call didn't end at that point, though. There was just an eerie quiet as Brian and Annette waited in agony for their son to tell them what was wrong. But he never did. Unsure of what else to do, they hung up and tried calling him again multiple times, each time getting no response. Brandon Swanson would never be seen or heard from again. The search. Brian and Annette Swanson reported their son missing at 6:30 a.m. that morning. However, local police initially didn't take their concerns seriously, stating that it wasn't unusual for a young man his age to stay out all night. Deputies advised them to just be patient and wait for him to return on his own. "It's his right to be missing," one officer reportedly said to the worried parents. Discovery of Brandon Swanson's car. When police obtained Brandon's cell phone records, they discovered that on the night he disappeared, he had actually been near Porter, approximately 25 miles away where he told his parents he was. Shortly thereafter, his car was located in a ditch near Taunton. Lyon County Sheriff Eric Wallen said that Brandon's phone was working well into the next day, and that the officers continued to try calling it and getting his voicemail. "We were able to use the cell phone tower technology to have an idea of where his last communications or phone calls came from. So that put us on a cell tower up in that area," said Wallen. "So then the search was focused there, and the car was located. His car keys were missing, along with his cell phone, but there was no obvious signs of foul play. The vehicle simply looked like it was stuck in the ditch or partially in the ditch. There was nothing odd about it. If a person passed by, they would think it was just parked there or broken down and stuck." Search dogs pick up his scent. Once the search finally did begin, it was an extensive one, including hundreds of volunteers, trained search dogs, and air surveillance. Search operations covered both the land and the Yellow Medicine River, as some of the search and rescue personnel speculated that Swanson could have fallen into the current and drowned. Search dogs picked up his scent on a trail near the river. They followed the scent to the water and then over to the other side of the river, indicating that Brandon may have been in the water. after which they continued north along the riverbank towards the Yellow Medicine County line, where the trail suddenly ended. The search dogs also picked up the scent of human remains a few times near Mud Creek, north of Porter. However, nothing pertinent to the case was ever recovered there. Wallen said that investigators had also done extensive excavation work on the river. As late as 2021, there were still teams sifting through the dirt in search of Brandon's remains. Ongoing complication. Interestingly, the canine teams picked up Brandon's scent on a piece of farm equipment nearby, but the farmer to whom it belonged refused to let authorities search his property. At this point, Ken Anderson of Emergency Support Services realized that several promising areas couldn't be searched because of a variety of thorny legal conflicts revolving around landowner permissions. Local cattle farmers, for example, didn't want police search dogs on their property. 14 years later, investigators were still having problems with this issue. In at least a couple of circumstances, that problem is still in existence, Anderson confirmed. They will not allow us on their property. We don't dispute the reason why. We try and work out a method that would make it acceptable, and we've not been able to come up with a working compromise. Yellow Medicine County Sheriff Bill Flayton worked with Emergency Support Services on requesting landowner permission, helping to create an access schedule for the farmland so that investigators and search teams could work around the planting and harvest seasons. The problem, he said, usually arises when law enforcement doesn't have probable cause, although more property owners try to be accommodating. They know their property, and they search it and look around as well. Another facet to the complication, according to Anderson, has been that specialized canine scent work is a precious and time-sensitive resource. In the whole state of Minnesota, there have been no more than 3 dogs available at any given time with the capability for this kind of search. The problem is that, as time goes on, it becomes much more complicated to fulfill the search because you need to have canines that have experience in aged scent. What happened to Brandon? It is important to note that due to a childhood eye injury, Brandon Swanson had poor vision in his left eye, leading him to have depth perception issues. He had to wear glasses for his condition, but for unknown reasons, on the night of his disappearance, he left his glasses in his car. There were many unmarked cisterns in the area, and authorities have considered the possibility that Brandon could have fallen into one. Additionally, it was just under 40 degrees that night, so it's also plausible that Brandon succumbed to hypothermia, especially if he fell into the river. Despite the fact that he had been drinking that night, his parents were adamant that their son sounded perfectly lucid, albeit alarmed, during their phone call. Update. Sheriff Wallen stated in 2023 that tips are still coming in. Within the last year, he said, the Sheriff's Office and Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or BCA, had received new information pertaining to the night Brandon went missing and the events leading up to his disappearance. This included third-hand claims that Brandon got into an argument with someone around the time he was last seen. None of the tips have panned out, unfortunately. It seems that every tip we receive, we investigate and we run into a dead end. Wallen laminated. It was either false or the information wasn't accurate. They all seem to run into a dead end. Interestingly, Brandon has a page on VICAP, a database dedicated to violent crimes. Besides his car, not one piece of physical evidence related to Brandon has been found. His keys, cell phone, and clothing were never recovered. Brandon's Law. Brian and Annette Swanson never forgot the nonchalant attitude they encountered from law enforcement when they first reported their son missing. Knowing firsthand how crucial it is in a missing persons case to start investigating as soon as possible, they wanted to spare other families from having to deal with this nightmare. So, they became advocates and lobbied for the passing of what would become known as Brandon's Law, which requires law enforcement to immediately begin a preliminary investigation when an adult goes missing under dangerous circumstances, regardless of their age. The bill was signed by Governor Tim Pawlenty on May 7, 2009, and went into effect on July 1st of that same year. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to The Unsolved. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the rest of the membership of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much for your continued dedication every single time a video is published, and thank you for showing the channel so much love. I reciprocate the love right back to you. And as I always like to say, without your support, I don't have a voice, and this channel wouldn't exist. So thank you so much for being here for Back to Ashes. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. In the meantime, please stay vigilant and keep yourselves safe. I will be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.